Hi, my name is Rodolfo Almeida. I'm a data designer and visual journalist based in São Paulo, and a master's student at Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. The work I'm going to be presenting here today is part of my ongoing research on the representations of the climate crisis in data visualization. The paper being presented here today is called Plastics in the Environment, Analyzing Complex Environmental Phenomena in Data Visualization, and is supervised by Dr. Boris Kuzminski. The context behind this research is that of the surrounding climate crisis and the growing consensus around a number of ideas which seem to capture its complexity. One of these ideas is that of the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is a term coined by Nobel laureate and chemist Paul Crutzen in the 2000s, which defines a new epoch on the history of the planet, which would come to replace the Holocene, which is marked and defined by the anthropic influences over the planet, meaning the impact of human activity on the planet, its systems, and its life. The Great Acceleration is another idea tied to that of the Anthropocene, which defines a perceived and measurable exponential growth in a number of key indicators of life on Earth, based on two different classes, which are planetary systems and socioeconomic trends. So a variety of indicators such as acidification of oceans, carbon emissions, and pollutants all have seen an exponential and never seen before growth in the last 100 years. Both of these ideas indicate that the climate crisis represents a never before seen crisis in terms of its scale and also in its complexity. When it comes to complexity, we'll be referring to two different ideas, one by Edgar Morin and his theory of complexity, and the other by philosopher Timothy Morton, and that is the idea of hyperobjects, which we'll be examining more thoroughly today. So the problem being presented here is that the complexity of the climate crisis and other environmental phenomena of such scale challenges our human understanding and therefore our visualization practices. So we're interested in finding out how are these massive problems being represented in data visualization. Our objectives in this work are to identify different strategies of representing plastic pollution and other complex environmental phenomena through data visualization. We're choosing to single out plastic pollution since it is a visible phenomena, which is perceivable in our immediate reality, but also has another hyperdimensional quality to it, which ties directly to the idea of hyperobjects, as we'll see further on. We're also going to employ the concept of hyperobjects as a framework for analyzing environmental data visualizations and analyzing suitability for it. In this paper, we're analyzing three different projects, which are all based on data visualizations and address the plastic pollution. One of them is called What Happens to the Plastic We Throw Out by National Geographic. It is a data-driven online narrative, which is part of a journalistic publication, covering pollution on basically most of Southeast Asia and emissions of plastic pollution in the ocean. The other is Plastic Air by Georgia Lupi, Talia Cotton, and Phil Cox, which is an exploratory tool which allows you to see representations of microplastics in the air. And the other is Drowning in Plastic by the news agency Reuters, which is another journalistic outlet using figurative representations of plastic bottles, all piled up together next to important landscapes as a representation of all the plastic being thrown out on the planet. These projects were selected as examples of different approaches to the same problem, which is by nature, as we explain in the paper, a wicked problem, a problem of design which had many different ways of approaching and solutions to it. And the three of them are digital, visual based, and involve data visualizations as a way of addressing representations of realities bigger than that we can perceive through our naked eye. The three projects were selected as part of a larger corpus of work which is being analyzed in this research. These projects were analyzed one by one in regards to their design choices, employing a variety of authors from established literature in data visualization and interaction design, but also with how they interact with the idea of hyperobjects, which we're going to explore further now. Coined by Timothy Morton, hyperobject is a term used to define ideas and phenomena which challenge our understanding of them due to their massive scale, and is very applicable in the case of climate phenomena such as the climate crisis itself. Morton uses as examples plastic, which we're going to be focusing here today, which is not only one bottle of plastic, but all the plastic on the world as an entity together, as an object. And other examples such as uranium radiation, the climate crisis itself, and so on. Morton suggests 5 different properties which every hyperobject would contain. And those are the properties of viscosity, non-locality, liquidity, multidimensionality, and interobjectivity. For this paper, we're going to be focusing on the numbers 2, 4, and 5, which are non-locality, multidimensionality, and interobjectivity. And we're going to single them out as aspects that we could look for in data visualizations and see how they are addressed in the 3 projects we're analyzing here. Non-locality refers to the capacity of hyperobjects to cover massive scales, which also temporal and spatial scales, which make it difficult for it to be perceived in any of its local manifestations. So a single plastic bottle doesn't represent the totality of plastic and microplastic which exists in our atmosphere. And its massive scale defies our perception in any of its local manifestations. Multidimensionality refers to the capacity of hyperobjects to occupy the superior dimensional space, which is only partially perceived as 3-dimensional. So in the example of the plastic bottle, if we analyze one single plastic bottle, we can see all the different dimensions that they occupy, such as when it is microplastics or plastics in the ocean or plastics inside other forms of life, such as fish and other water fauna. Interobjectivity refers to the capacity of hyperobjects to be formed by and also form complex relations between objects, and can only be perceived by the traces they leave of such relations. So hyperobjects exist as a complex mesh of different objects and ideas and phenomena, which can only be perceived as a whole in their relations with one another. These 3 ideas are going to be analyzed further in these visualizations, and we're going to present a possible framework for analyzing visualizations and search for them. After applying the analysis framework to the 3 projects being analyzed here, you can see how each of them address each of the 3 properties of the hyperobjects being singled out in this project, that of non-locality, multidimensionality, and interobjectivity. 2 of the projects being analyzed here address the property of non-locality as concentrated, meaning they actively display and visualize and represent the plastic pollution as concentrated bunches of plastic, and shows it as not defying these scales of space and time, which is what happens in the plastic air, which seems to show that the plastic we throw out actually can take on multiple forms, such as that of microplastics in the air itself. The multidimensionality property is shown as visible and invisible in 2 of the projects, what happens to the plastic we throw out and plastic air, which address specifically the existence of certain manifestations of this plastic which are invisible to the naked eye, such as that of microplastics again, while drowning in plastic, for example, focuses on piling up all the plastic that exists as visible bottles in these 3D renders of figurative bottles. The interobjectivity property, which refers to how hyperobjects form and are formed by complex relations with one another, are addressed here in 2 different ways, that of static or interactive. Static is when in the drowning in plastic project, we see that the bottles and the plastic pollution is shown as a single phenomena not related to any other climate phenomena in the visualization, in the representations. While in plastic air and what happens to the plastic we throw out, we see that the visualization suggests that there are interactions between these plastics and other forms of life, such as in the air we breathe, so in their relations with other forms of life, and what happens to the plastic we throw out with their interactivity with the oceans, for example. This paper is largely based around the work of Timothy Morton, but also referencing other visualization designers and researchers which help us to analyze the works presented here. I invite you all to check out the full paper, but also to get to know the work we're doing at LabVis, which is the Laboratorio of Visualization at Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Thank you very much.